We are going to go ahead and get started on this first session this morning. So welcome. Hopefully you all enjoyed this morning's keynotes. This session is on T&E concepts for modern and emerging technologies. So I'm excited to hear our various speakers who are going to speak about a variety of different technologies that we have been looking at for T&E, with the common theme that our adversary is getting more advanced, they're getting more complex, and we need to be able to combat that and to be able to test against those complex and emerging adversaries. So with that, I will introduce Ms. Christina Houfek and Dr. Maegen Nix, who will do our first presentation on the joint test concept, reimagining T&E for the modern joint environment. With that, I will turn it over to you both.
Do I have a clicker?
You have a clicker right here.
I have the controller on my chest.
You
and
have
other people.
this
Okay.
right here is going to go forward, this is going to go back, and that's going to be your laser pointer right
All
there.
right. We are
And
on an
you
adventure.
just need to, I think we just need to share your.
Oh, this
Oh,
one
they will.
shares?
You guys going to share the slides? You're good. Make it full screen. Yep. Perfect.
All right. So I'm Chris or Christina, either one. If you grab me, I answer to both. And this is Dr. Maegen Nix. We're going to talk you through the joint test concept. We only have 30 minutes, and so I'm going to shoot a lot of information at you. I do want to receive comments, so if I don't get to you to receive some input from you, please grab me afterwards, because it's really critical. The community of interest and the community of practice is critical to the success of this concept. All right.
I can just progress.
Okay. So here's the origin of how we got here. And I don't know if everybody here is familiar with DOT&E and their implementation plan for their strategy. But we are binned under the test the way we fight pillar. However, we recognize that everything we're doing has to have considerations across all of them. So you see the check marks there go across. But the big bold one, they're the people who we report to on that aspect. Go ahead. All right, so as our session chair mentioned, we are going to be contested in all domains by highly capable adversaries, likely in non-contiguous combat operations and distributed. So we're looking at the global world, and what's not on here is our adversary is very interested in blocking our information flow. So targeting that information sharing network is a challenge. So the question for us in T&E is not only how do we prepare for tomorrow's fight, but how do we enhance our ability to do the fight tonight, right? There are some short-term, quick turnarounds that we need to be responding to. We're not just thinking way out in the future. So how do we define success? So we use the ability to execute combatant commands, com plans, and O plans. That's the success criteria, right? Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We are supporting our warfighters as they go out and try to execute. So notionally speaking, if we have a capability and a capacity as that shape, the solid shape is demonstrating, but we need to get up into that upper right quadrant up there to where we are successful. How do we get there? What is it that's going to enable us to make up that capacity and capability gap? So Dr. Bruce Morris with he's at NSW, Naval Special Warfare. He created this equation, the capability and effectiveness equation, and he identified these 5 aspects that are likely to impact our ability to either increase capacity or capability. And the reality is personnel is probably not going to change very much. Resources are probably not going to change significantly in a positive direction. And authorities are likely to change very slowly if they change at all. So the 2 biggest spaces, that we're going to make a difference is equipment, technology, and training. And I'm hoping that you're nodding up and down, recognizing that T&E impacts both of those zones significantly, right? Okay. All right, so our year one mission, this started last year, FY23, is to actually, as described, reimagine efficient T&E. Now that's kind of fun, right? We're not starting from as we do things now and how can we improve it. We are actually actively reimagining what the future could look like. Go ahead.
Okay. So if you are involved at all with test and evaluation for the services, could you raise your hand? Okay, so we've got a lot of folks here that understand service-related test and evaluation. How many of you guys have been involved in joint test and evaluation, looking for a mission capability where you have multiple services involved with multiple platforms, a system of systems that each service is bringing together a different capability to create a joint mission capability? All right, a lot fewer hands. Okay, who's in charge of that?
That's a great question. No one owns the systems view, especially even at an individual service, nonetheless joint.
Okay, all right. So now you begin to see our problem and our challenge. When Chris put that initiative that we're trying to help develop forward, we realized that innovation was going to be key to this, and developing a community of interest with a whole bunch of different stakeholders, because nobody has authority or agency or the policies to do this at this time. So we even used a mission engineering background, which is just assess the state of what the organizational constructs look like now and what they bring to the table, so that we can get to that future vision. And we had done some work on innovation a couple of years ago. We did a congressional report on how we're training innovation within the services in many capacities. And lo and behold, do you think that DoD has a definition of innovation? It does not. Like, how is that possible that we don't have an innovation definition? DHS is ahead of DoD in this aspect. They do. But so we created this definition, the development of a new or significantly changed service, product, process, structure, or policy, as the definition of what we thought innovation is. Okay, so what? What happens when you innovate? Does it matter? Right? There are different kinds of innovation. There's architectural innovation. There's sort of the radical disruptive innovation. We did a lot of work in that aspect. But really, just innovating on its own is great. But what does it get you? Unless it's adopted, it really doesn't get you anything. And so that's where we try to start to think, okay, well, what are the different facets of movement across, in terms of innovating for DoD and its capabilities that need to be explored, right? So you have different organizations that are doing different parts of this. So you have inception, which may happen in the DoD or may not happen in the DoD. I mean, in today's world, a lot of this happens within private industry. And then you have identification. And so identification, there are certainly entities within DoD. In fact, everybody is trying to identify what the next big thing is, or how to bring in a capability and integrate it within the operational force. But once you do that identification, you have to acquire it, and that creates its own process. And then once you think about acquiring it, you should be immediately thinking about how you integrate it within the fleet or the Corps or, the field. And then even at that point, you still have to have the people that are out there potentially using it adopt it. And that's a challenge in and of itself. How many times have you guys evaluated something, put it out into the fleet, fielded it, and then nobody uses it, right? And so innovation is a lot more complex than just the act itself. And innovation can happen in all of these different spaces. So here, just one of the things with respect to the JTC is that you're going to have resistance factors, and you're going to have pieces of innovation that must occur. And how do we take these concepts and really engage them in the process that Chris has been leading to develop a joint test concept? And so I'll step off and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Megan. We never brief these the same way, and it's really fun to have this dialogue, to talk deeply about the innovation piece. And I think that's really at the core of our thinking. Nope. Oh. So just one point on this. If you'll notice, there's a significant difference between adoption assessment attributes and resistance key factors. We treat resistance as if they're latent adopters. That is not true. And the study of innovation adoption resistance is a nascent field. And this is critical for us in the DoD because we are a legacy sector and we are programmed to resist radical and disruptive innovations. Okay? Okay. So how are we going about thinking about that with the joint test concept? Go ahead and build it. The leading change integration, right? We're thinking about how are we going to enable this innovation, because it is a concept, a new product, policy, structure. How are we going to get there? So we have congressional language telling us that we need to reimagine T&E. We have an I plan, we have DoD guidance. And we've built this diverse community of interest. And when I say that we're approaching 50 discrete organizations who are supporting this effort, that shows you how many people are putting in their own time and energy into this because it's that needed. We spent year one focusing on the vision and strategy, and this counts as that communicating the change vision. And you can wrap it all the way around. So this, if you haven't read John Cotter's Leading Change, and you are somebody who's touching on innovation, write it down, read it. It's incredibly valuable. Okay. All right, so year one, where did we go? Go ahead and build the whole slide. So here we are. So we came up with this idea that you have the capability life cycle that extends longer than the system life cycle, right? And so instead of thinking and binning, okay, here's where OT starts, here's where developmental testing ends, we're thinking about this entire capability life cycle. Go ahead. Next slide. Now, the consideration for this is that means data along the entire capability life cycle and potentially before the capability life cycle is relevant. How good are we about having data that we can all use that's high quality and available and accessible? Anybody? Are we great at that? No, we really aren't. So this is pretty edgy concept, and it's really important. The other thing is, as we were talking about at the beginning, as Megan pointed out, when you're starting looking at joint capabilities, it's not one system that enables a capability. Right? We are not going to fight alone as a service. We are going to fight joint combined. That is the reality of how things are going to go. Imagine not having the Space Force connecting us. Just imagine it right now, okay?
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Sorry, can you move back towards
Oh,
the
you
mic?
can't hear me.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not actually sorry. I prefer to stand off to the side, but I'll do it. All right. Go ahead. Next one. Okay, so here's where we end at the end of year one. And you can see at the center there are layers. And you'll notice an absolute lack of the use of developmental testing, contracting testing, operational testing, live fire. None of that is written here. It's implied that it happens, but we're not even thinking in the existing structure right now. And we're looking at the system performance layer, we're looking at the capability immersion layer, and at the joint capability demonstration layer. And if you are a systems engineer, you will start to recognize how this is aligning with the systems engineering hierarchy and also lends itself to mission engineering. Around the outside edge, you have these important structures. We need to have a data strategy. We need to train not only the T&E workforce, but the operational workforce. Who is going to do this, right? We need resourcing. Who's in charge? Who owns this? We need organizational change. We need to have a live virtual constructive environment, accessible, that's distributed, and we need the authorities. No problem, right?
And the money.
And the money, well, that's resourcing, yeah. Yeah, resourcing is people and dollars. Go ahead. So that lands us where we are this year. So we've got the concept of where we're going. Now we have to understand the reference architecture so we can always compare apples to apples and not apples to broccoli.
So is this where you are now?
This is where we are right now, okay? And so we've done our first workshop where we've created the high-level reference architecture, and we recognize that we need several much more detailed reference architectures if this is going anywhere. However, we're taking our next step is going to be actually a simulation where we're modeling out the impact of the joint test concept on some joint challenges. This next workshop will be at the unclass level, but it's that mission engineering that is the underpinning that's enabling us to make sure that all of the T&E that's occurring are linked back and usable.
I would understand why you would lean on the M&S side or whatever, but just the pure knowledge to be gained and captured within this architecture in some sort of lily pad, as you just kind of probably hit, right? You need a 100,000-foot view, 1,000-foot
Right.
view, 100-foot view. Those models are linked, or those architectures are linked between those, so you can dive down into the details and pull back up. Just having that information will be golden.
Okay, that's great.
Model and sim is icing on the cake and stuff, but just having those kill threads, kill webs, kill chains at those various levels of resolution for current and future.
We do have a probabilistic model that's going to underpin some of the decisions, but for the most part, it's sort of a hyped up tabletop exercise where we can get into some of those layers and have people exercise and then provide thoughts and feedback on them so that we can gain clarity on developing them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So here, just along those lines, here's our study design. And the most important piece I want you to notice is that expand the community of interest. That means everybody here, if you want to be a part of this, just let us know, right? We want to integrate. This is not a restricted entity. The other piece that we're doing is we're working with the joint T&E office to validate the concept. So we are practicing what we're preaching, and we are gathering data from our events to make sure that we can provide them with the data to be able to assess the validity of the concept and should it move forward. So it's both practicing what we preach and then getting into the idea of, is this doable at the concept level? So here we are at the end of year 2. And this is a pretty complex visual. And if you are familiar with TAC, the T&E as a continuum, we have very similar ideas about this, okay? We have different naming conventions, but you see the capability life cycle where the system life cycle is. You see that the relevant data now has a two-ended arrow, recognizing that you may need data that's outside of the specific capability life cycle here. And at the root of it is mission engineering. All the way through here, you have this cyclical space, and pivoted in between each of these executions of a JTC type of an event, you have more mission engineering. And the beautiful thing is that T&E is also contributing to awareness of our capabilities. So this is a feedback loop, not only to the operational community, but back to the acquisitions community and the requirements community. So all of these pillars are being held and supported and provide input. We have the decision support evaluation framework. Do I have any of my MITRE friends in here who did the DCEF? I saw Natalie out there. Okay. So that is a MITRE-led initiative, and they have the integrated decision support key, which is primarily sponsored by DOT&E, and you see those timelines. And we recognize the need for those things to overlap. So at the JTC, because these two projects are so well developed already, we are leaning on them, recognizing that this is an architecture that we can integrate. This tells us already how they're thinking about the data and information and how it's accessed to make data-driven decisions. All right. How many of you know what mission engineering is? Okay. So I've talked a lot about mission engineering and glazed eyes. So I'm going to share with you what the MEG 2.0 states what mission engineering is. What is important for us to recognize is that mission engineering becomes a common language where the user, where the developer, where the tester can all speak together. We can all build empathy and understand each other's needs, right? Because even though perhaps the acquisition community has a reputation for prioritizing cost and schedule over performance, that's a cultural piece. They still care about performance, right? But they don't want to get sent to Congress to testify about why things are late or why things are expensive. And so we recognize that mission engineering is the space where T&E professionals can look at a mission thread and say, these are all of the touch points where my system is going to have to be integrated, not only at the service level, but the system of systems that is the joint. And then you add the environment. And then maybe there are ways to assess that all the way back in what we now call developmental testing, right? Can we be collecting data through decomposed mission threads that enables these later assessments to determine operational validity and usefulness? And wow, wouldn't an operational commander appreciate knowing upon the fielding of a system that it actually works for their plans?
And drive and or replace requirements documents, in my opinion. It is the requirements document to a certain extent.
And that's, so we very strongly feel that the requirements system as it is now has to have some agility in it, and we need to be able to update requirements, which means one of the key populations that has to be trained is contracting officers, so that they can write appropriate contracts. I know that the Space Force, when they're working in their innovation centers, write really short contracts. And that enables them to, like, if they have to update requirements, they can just keep doing it on a cyclical basis. So these are all challenges that we recognize. So how many of you have seen an OV1 before? Okay, that's quite a few, actually. That's outstanding. And so this is notional, publicly releasable. We have just images, and we're showing the connectivity. But if you think about there being a system on each of these craft, right? And then there's a new developing drone that has been found to be resistant to adversary tactics, right? We've red teamed it. It shows real promise to fill a gap. But that requires updates to all of these other systems. And one of them falls into your lab, right? And now you're being told, hey, I know you have your plan, your temp all set up, but we need to know, you need to make a software update, whatever that piece is. How do we create the flexibility that we can become that agile in real time when these innovations occur to enable them to be adopted and implemented at the pace or outpacing our adversaries who are demonstrating to be very quick at operationalizing innovations? This is an example of a kill chain, just a point of order. A mission thread or a kill chain mission threads are the parent. A kill chain is very specific. Find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. F2T2EA. That is doctrinal. Any other mission thread that is not F2T2EA is not a kill chain. Okay, so I will often use the term mission thread, mission engineering thread, or mission web, because we don't want this only to be about F2T2EA. Can you think of, like, logistics? There's a whole chain for logistics, a mission chain. So the idea here is we can look at all the systems that are doing this one little mission, little m mission, under a really big M mission, And we have a pathway. We have a single chain to execute. I saw the time. Yep. But the reality is, do you see the increased connectivity? So if you only do the assessment along the chain, look at what the operational commander might need to default to. Does the soft system, can it communicate SATCOM? Can it touch all those other pieces that are in the column? Can it communicate? If we aren't thinking about that complexity instead of a chain, if we're not thinking about webs, we are doing a disservice. And that gets back into the requirements piece. So we only have 3 minutes left, but I'd like, which is pretty good. That was a lot of slides and a lot of information, right? But I'd like to ask and offer this question. If you know this is out here, it's 2 parts. How could this impact your campaign of learning that you're leading or participating in for T&E? And how could you impact mission engineering the other way around?
It can fully orchestrate your tests along the whole acquisition lifecycle, in my opinion. If done, captured in an appropriate way, it can be used to orchestrate tests across systems, whether it be live, virtual, constructed.
I'll buy you a beer later. I didn't pay him to say that. That's actually... Anybody else have anything to offer? Anything maybe resisting this idea? We avoid groupthink.
So I would say the resistance of this has been the complexity defining these things in a way that it's shareable across the services and capturable and just outside of the FTTT EA. Like everything outside of that seems to have been very, very, very difficult to kind of write down succinctly and actually
Right.
keep it going from what I've seen.
Yeah, and that's the importance of having that architecture, right? That you would have the shared architecture for a mission that you can then build a web.
We're doing it today, right? That each individual service and the joint has interoperability and certification testing. And the only way to do interoperability and certification testing, as I'm tracking, is they reach to the individual programs or program executive offices and have conversations with them on what they think their system does in an operational environment. And then from that information, they define missions, and from that set of missions, then they do interoperability and certification testing to the best of their ability for various versions and systems and so we are doing it today. It's just not codified in a standard, as you're saying.
And it's not ubiquitous. We have places that we really are doing it well. And we are about to go over time, so I don't want to get the hook. But I do want to say this afternoon we're doing a tutorial on design thinking. And the activities that we are doing in that tutorial are going to support the joint test concept. So if you would like to directly inform the joint test concept without having to dedicate more of your time, I'm going to plug showing up for that. It's at 3:30. Okay. And I'm on time exactly.